onto something that we've previously done in terms of genetics. Will be add sources as new implement of how far this does go. And then next week, maybe we'll see a little bit of robotics and see how that will affect Jewish law and halacha, etc., etc. First of all, a lot of this lecture is based on Rabbi Michael Broidy's article about genetic testing. And he's a professor of law at Emory University. It's also based on works of Rabbi Moshe Tendler. And, we'll discuss a little bit and see, where we go with this. Maybe we'll make a little bit of a discussion as well. And then we can, we'll see. I'll unmute everybody when that comes to be. Okay. So just a recap in terms of the biology, just so that everybody knows what I'm talking about. So CRISPR or gene editing or genetic engineering, gene therapy, all these types of things, okay? And when I'm saying gene, it's Gene, not you, Gene, okay? Gene therapy won the 2020 Nobel Prize for Chemistry. So, it's really what's going on in the scientific world right now, more than anything else, is looking at how do we heal the world through going into species DNA and fixing things that are wrong. There's two major categories of fixing things within species. One is called somatic, which means that you're just fixing the object or the person, animal, plant, whatever it is. You're fixing that individual itself, but you're not doing something lasting which will change the reproduction of that species forever. So, for example, if you change a human's eye color, it won't affect the eye color of their children. But then you get the second category, which they call the germ, the germ or non-somatic, the germ or reproductive cells. Obviously, if you change those cells, that's going to change the line of the future of whatever you're trying to fix forever. And that's a much, much bigger deal. So when it comes to somatic cells, generally in Judaism, we take the approach that healing is a good thing. Although there are some statements by the Ramban, maybe by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, others, who were a little bit seemingly against doctors, thinking that only God can heal, doctors cannot heal. Pretty much the consensus is that it's a good thing to go to a doctor when you're sick. And not only is it a good thing, but you must go to a doctor when you're sick. And not only that, but whatever the doctor prescribes, you must take. It's not an option for a Jew to be unhealthy. You can't be a person who says, I want to die. I don't want to live so long, etc., etc., etc. Judaism views life as a blessing, and you're meant to live as long as you can. And that is a divine obligation that every Jewish person, and I would say every human, should be thinking of, is that life is a blessing. And even if you're sad, etc., 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 it doesn't give you the right to end it. So that is one thing for sure. That's a consensus that when it comes to health, one needs to go for it. I mentioned that there is a famous argument about what happens about medicines that can help, but they can also damage. So here today, we're taking a COVID, the pandemic. I saw today, I think England is going to be the first country in the world that approves the Moderna vaccine. Moderna is a company who produces the vaccine. Now, has it been tested? Yes, it has been tested. Has it been tested rigorously? Well, not that rigorously, in the sense of the pandemic's only been here for 9 months. So if you look at General Biotech takes years and years to be passed that you can now give it over to millions and millions of people. But here they called it Operation Warp Speed. I think that's what President Trump called it. to get this drug out as quickly as possible. And, so the case is, what about situations where medicine can help, but it can also destroy? So this is not a modern question. Well, I mean, it's not, my generation's question. This was in the 1800s, after Rabbi Chaim Ozer, who was the Av Beit Din of Vilna. He was the head of the Beit Din of Vilna. And he said, in a situation where there was a chance that a person takes medicine and they will be healed, or there's a chance that they take the medicine and they will die quicker, what should the person do? Meaning someone was very, very ill. We're not talking about someone with the flu. Someone was very, very ill. They could either, flip a coin and try to take the medicine and be healed, or flip the coin, take the medicine, and they'll die sooner. Rav Chaim Ozer in that particular case said, you may take the medicine. Not you should take the medicine, but you're allowed to take the chance in a situation where you've got, probability that you might be healed. Even if it's a 50-50, you're allowed to take that medicine in that situation. Rav Moshe Feinstein seemingly disagreed and said that in a situation where, there's a chance that you could be healed, but there's also a chance that it could kill you, he said you should refrain from taking that medicine and rather just not take the medicine. So that's what happens when it comes to, choosing about a medicine that hasn't been proven. There are other cases when you're dealing with genetics. So, genetics is a new study. So hopefully all those situations about genetics, not knowing if it will really heal you or not, that will be solved in the future when we've been testing longer and longer, just like with COVID, with regards to everything that we do in genetics. Hopefully through time, all of that will sort itself out and we should know exactly how it affects us. So that problem is not going to be such a problem in the future. What about something like an amniocentesis test? I think I pronounced it right, but I'm not sure. That's the test that a mother takes when she's pregnant in the first trimester. I think it's the first trimester, to determine whether she has children with Down syndrome, God forbid, or some type of, very difficult thing on her baby. What about taking situations like that? So generally speaking, it should be okay. But here you have a situation where motivation might be a factor, because in general, Judaism is against abortion. So can you take this test when your intention is that if anything's wrong, you are going to abort? So that is an ethical question over there about this test. If your intention is you don't really want to abort, you're just making sure that everything's okay, then possibly yes. But if your intention is that if anything is, even not 100% normal, meaning there's a chance, a 3-degree chance that your baby will have this or that or that or that, and a person has in their mind, I'm going to abort if it's not 100%, that might be ethically, controversial when it comes to Jewish values and Jewish ethics. There are other problems which come up about genetic testing. One is social inequality. So if the doctors are able to figure out, and they already know how to figure out, this is just a case of getting it out there onto the market that it can be used. But I'd say not if, but when doctors know exactly how to make you 2 inches taller, and maybe turn your fat into muscle in an easier way for a person to do that. You have to do half the amount of exercise. Is that allowed? So you're not going to have the problem of healing anymore, because it's not like Rav Moshe Feinstein's it could kill you. It's been proven that you can do it. FDA has approved it, and this is already, I'm telling you, this technology is already here. It's just a case of it's not being offered to the populations at the moment because it's going through all its testing. But when it does arrive, and that's why I'm saying it's the future, that you can make your children 2 inches taller and make it that their genetics, they don't need to do as much exercise to be in good health. Will this be ethical? So some people argue that it's not ethical because you're going to be making rich people will succeed more than poor people, because rich people will have access to these genetics, and the rich people will become taller, and the rich people will become better good looking, and the rich people will become whatever. And the poor people will be the shorter, and the ones with diseases, and the ones with whatever. And it's a socio-economic problem. So how does Judaism look at that? So Rabbi Brody, hi Jen, who's just joined. Rabbi Brody, he doesn't think that this is a problem with Jewish ethics, because he says that when the insulin first began for diabetics, it was also just for the super rich. Only the super rich could afford the medicine of getting insulin when that was discovered for diabetics. But today, most people who are diabetics today, thankfully, have access to insulin. So that's the way that technology works, is that it starts off with the rich, and once more people get access to it, they become rich, or they manage to figure out how, the drug prices come down, and then it becomes, accessible to more people. So he doesn't think that social inequality from genetics is such an issue. Another problem that he mentioned is the human reproductive waste that comes from trying to make cures. So when you are trying to test, how you're going to make a little fetus 2 inches taller, believe it or not, many fetuses will be used as tests, and many of them will be thrown away as dead fetuses before you come out with a cure for how to make that fetus 2 inches taller. Rabbi Bleich is very much against this, and that's why he's very much against the genetics and the technology of genetics when it comes to reproductive, doing it on the fetus, because he assumes, and this is the mainstream view of Judaism for sure, I think there's like 6 different views about this. I can't remember the exact amount, but there's many views about this, about, damaging fetuses. If you just chuck away a fetus, God forbid, is that murder? So some rabbis do believe it's murder, at least homicide. Other rabbis say, no, it's not homicide because it's only a fetus. You can't say that killing a fetus is a human, but it's still absolutely forbidden from the Torah. The most liberal ones will say it's not forbidden from Torah, but it's least forbidden from the rabbis. So you've got everything from saying that from its homicide, from the most strict people, saying to it's rabbinically forbidden, but no one says it's allowed. So Rabbi Bleich would say that this is a big problem, doing genetic testing on fetuses, because you don't know how many fetuses will be wasted, in doing this. Now, other people might argue and say something like, well, even if it takes 1,000 fetuses, but it ends up saving 10 million people, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? In general, the Talmud says you're not allowed to weigh one person against the other. No one's blood is redder than the next. So maybe it's not even a numbers game. So that is another ethical principle when we're talking about genetics, is what are you testing on? If you're testing on human fetuses and you're throwing them away, that could be a big problem in genetics in the future when it comes to Jewish law. Another one is diversity. So we've got this commandment to get married and to have children. And the seemingly logic about it is that the more people there are in the world, the more diversity there is in the world, the better it is for everyone to have children with each other. Because we know that insular families who just marry their first cousins doesn't work out so well. So is this a problem with getting rid of genetics, getting rid of diversity, when we just make everybody the same? Meaning we make everybody 6 foot, and we make everybody able to do less, exercise. And through genetics, people become more like Aryan, more perfect in every way. Is that a problem of diversity? Could be ethically a problem of diversity, but some diversities you don't want. As an example, do you want Tay-Sachs carriers to exist? Now, I'm not saying if anyone on this call has Tay-Sachs, because I think like 1 in 10 Ashkenazi Jew has some form of Tay-Sachs or something like that. But the question is do we want our children and our grandchildren to be carrying the Tay-Sachs gene that, God forbid, you could end up with Tay-Sachs, or someone's great-grandchildren might get Tay-Sachs. We don't want that gene within our future. So, to go on the diversity argument of saying that making everyone more similar might be against God's plan of making things diverse, it's hard to argue that God would want diversity with diseases in them. So he doesn't see such a problem with that either. What about motives? So someone is in their 20s and they realize that they have problems with their bone marrow. Are they allowed to clone themselves so that their children have the same bone marrow as them, so that they can literally take dibs at their children's bone marrow? Would that be ethically allowed? So, of course, the child would have to consent to giving bone marrow to the parent. But what child, who loves their parent, wouldn't give their bone marrow to save the life of their parents? The question is the intention of the parent when they're having that child, when they're cloning that child. It's not like, I love you, Ma, I love you, baby, I want to have a baby with you. No, it's like, let's have a baby so that I can be saved with my bone marrow. So Rabbi Brody doesn't seem to think that that's a problem either. He says that, it's all wonderful to have the best intentions when you're having children. But that's not what the Torah says. The Torah just says, be fruitful and multiply. Have children. It doesn't say what your intention should be. So he also doesn't see such a problem with, cloning children in order to save parents, to give them, so to speak, be extra donors of organs. He doesn't seem to see that that's a problem. So for those are all just ethical problems, which Rabbi Brody doesn't see much of a problem in any of those ethical problems. Okay, now let's come on to more sources than I added last time in terms of, are genetically made people human? Also, how do you define the human? So if I'm taking genes from a person A, B, C, D, and E, and I'm combining all those genes into one little fetus and making a baby out of 10 people, how do you determine who that person is? Do they have 5 mommies? And, I don't know if you can have 3 daddies, but normally it works, they take more from the mother in terms of the genetics. So Rabbi Bleich does seem to say that you can have more than one mother when it comes to genetics. That's a massive idea over there, that, Judaism always was, you have one mother, all of a sudden now you can multiple mothers because you've got genes from different women. Unbelievable. Encyclopedia Talmudit, so the Talmudic encyclopedia defines someone, and I'm going to read you the quote. A person who is born from another person in the womb of a woman is prohibited to be killed. So there it's trying to define what a human is, because you're not allowed to kill humans. You can kill animals, but you're not allowed to kill humans. So a human, someone born from another person in the womb of a woman. So, how does that relate to cloning? Well, I mentioned the Rabbi Zera and the Ravi Sanhedrin, the Talmud Sanhedrin of, the one rabbi, sent over a Frankenstein that he had created to another rabbi, and the other rabbi saw that it couldn't talk, so he killed this Frankenstein human being. So that's one source in the Talmud, and I'm just going to give you the other sources that I have here so far. There's another source from the Jerusalem Talmud, and from the book of Niddah, chapter 3. It says, if a creature has a human body, and just to think that this is from like 200, 300 CE, it just blows your mind. Okay. If a creature has a human body, but its face is of an animal, so it's got an animal face, but a human body, it's not human. But if its body is like an animal, but it's got a human face, it is human. So the Jerusalem Talmud, again, like if you had read this before you knew about genetics, you would think that this is crazy, but now that we know genetics, now we can try actually understand what's going on over here. And Jerusalem Talmud saying, whatever the face is, that's what you define what that thing is. But it ends off by saying that even if it has a human body and an animal face, which should make it an animal, but if you see it studying Torah, then you treat it like a human. That's what the Jerusalem Talmud says in 300 CE. Unbelievable, unbelievable. It also says it in the vice versa. It says, and if it's got a human body, if it's got an animal body but a human face, which should make it human, but it's dragging a plow across a field like an animal would, consider it an animal. So that's another source that seems to suggest that although the Encyclopedia Talmudit determines that a human is defined by something that's born from the womb of a human, the Jerusalem Talmud suggested that if something acts like a human, it's human. Okay, interesting. One last source, so this is from the Talmud in Bechorot, page 8a. There's different publications of this page. So Rashi had a slightly different version than the way that we have it today. But Rashi's version says that a mermaid, literally, it doesn't say in the word mermaid, but it says there was a species of half fish, half human, that could have babies with a human. That thing is considered a human because it can have babies with a human. So that's another source from, the Talmud, which is, anywhere between 200 and 500 CE, which is trying to define what a human is. And, Rashi seems to say, if you can have babies with a human, you're human. The Jerusalem Talmud seems to say, if you act like a human, you're a human. Bottom line is genetically engineered people, even though they're not from the womb of a mother, they would be considered humans for sure, based on these other Talmuds, and therefore you could not kill them. Those people would have to do the mitzvot of the Torah, etc., etc., etc. The only caveat being, who are their parents? And that would be a big argument by saying, well, either they don't have parents, they're just genes, and therefore it's difficult to call their biological parents their halachic parents, or like Rabbi Bleich entertains that you can have multiple parents. And there's all different ramifications from that. You could have to respect more than one mother. Maybe you can't marry more than those people because those people have genetics in them which are from relatives of yours, etc., etc. This whole thing about that. Okay, last thing I want to say before I come on to the final part of this is Rabbi Akiva Eger, a famous rabbi 150 years ago. He had never seen a gorilla before. And he saw a gorilla for the first time, I'm sure in an article or in a newspaper. I doubt he went to the Congo. And he said, it looks so much like a human. Maybe it is a human. Unbelievable. Rabbi Akiva Eger wasn't sure if a gorilla is a human or not a human, based on how close it was to how a human acts. So I'm just saying, obviously today we would know that it's not a human. Today we've done those tests. We can see that it doesn't act like a human completely. But the major idea is that genetics definitely opens up that barrel of how you define a human. Okay, now I'm going to go into the last thing, which has to do with implications of genetic testing. First one, and this I'm going to unmute everyone in case anyone wants to comment. This is the part that will make a little bit of a discussion if anyone wants to. Okay. First one, when, and again, I'm not saying if, I'm saying when, because in my opinion, this is going to happen whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. Okay. When we are all taking genetic alterations for our bodies, to make ourselves look better, just like, in the old days, there's a big dilemma. Can a woman get breast implants for cosmetic reasons? So there's a whole hoo-ha, you're changing the human body, And is this ethically allowed? Is this medically allowed? Go to California today, okay, and you'll be shocked in the statistic of how many women have breast implants, cosmetic breast implants, okay? It's no more even a discussion. I mean, there are tens of thousands of doctors doing this, so worldwide. So that is already there. So the next stage, which is choosing your eye color and how you want your lips to be and how big you want your ears and, you know, how big you want your arms and these types of things, that's probably coming in the future. That's what's all being discussed. So the question is do employers have a right to demand tests? So this is what Rabbi Brody goes into. And he says, well, if you are an employer, you obviously want your employee to work as long as possible. You don't want them to take sick days. You don't want them to have bad genes that they go out of commission for a few weeks at a time. So can employers, you know, demand employees to go for genetic testing so the employers can say, wow, your genes look good. You know, I think that you're going to be a good worker. So that's one ethical question that he mentioned. On that one, what about that one? Are employers allowed to demand genetic tests from their employees? Okay, that one's an interesting one. I will say that I have heard the argument, and sorry to my sister who's a doctor, okay, and I'm not going to mention who said this, but it's someone, you know, in very close to me. Someone said to me, he thinks that it's an absolute waste of time for women in South Africa to become doctors. And his argument was that doctors are sponsored by the government to go to medical school in this country. Even if you pay for your medicine, it's still sponsored by the government, at least partly sponsored by the government for you to go to college. And women, in all likelihood, are going to have children when they are doctors. And that's going to take them out of the medical profession for a few years at least. And why is the government investing their scarce resources into women who aren't going to work as much as men are in terms of being doctors? He doesn't see it as the most efficient system. Now, I'm just telling you that's what he believes. And, you know, this would be the same thing with an employer. He would look at it the same thing. Let me do genetic testing on my workers to make sure that I get the best out of what it is. Okay, now, I would argue, yeah, Paul's got a comment. What do you want to say, Paul?
When I was human resources manager at Mutual, one of the labor laws is that you may not ask a prospective employee who is a woman if she's going to have children, because that would be against the law, because that might be a case of you saying, I'm not going to employ you because you might have children one day. So I think that issue would, in South Africa anyway, at the moment, would be quite an interesting issue.
Yeah, thank you. You know, so Paul, that's exactly what this Rabbi Brody is discussing as well. Then we have another situation. So let's take a specific employer, a sports team. So, you know, I know Neil likes Manchester United. So let's say Manchester United, Manchester United have people from 6 years old to go to the Manchester United training camp. And they work all the way through from 6 years old until they're 15. And when they're 15, maybe they have a chance of applying for the second team. And when they're 16 or 17, maybe for the first team. So the question Rabbi Brody asked is it ethical for Man United to do a test on a 6-year-old boy and to determine that this boy is only going to be 5'4"? He's never going to be able to make it in the Premier League based on his physique. That's going to be based on, you know, other genetic things that they can tell at the age of 6.
The problem
Take
with that,
away
Rabbi,
his talent at age 6 and say, you're great at age 6. Yeah, Alfonso.
the problem with that is
sorry,
that you are denying human potential. Irrespective of
Thank
whether that person is going to be a dwarf. It doesn't mean that person can't grow up to be a giant.
I like what you're saying, okay? And this is what Rabbi Brody says with regards to all these cases. I'll tell you. He says, number one is you have to view all these questions through the lens of A. Are you doing the genetic test for some type of health benefit? If it's not a health benefit, then he doesn't see why you should be able to demand genetic testing. So in the livable thing, I don't think he would say you would be able to do that. And the second thing he says, and that's what you were saying, is does the health benefit override the human ability to be different, which is what you're calling human potential? Are you denying a 6-year-old the chance to make it, even though statistics would say that it's a 99-1 potential that he will never make it to the Premier League based on his genetics? Is that denied? You know, so some people are going to argue we're a football club. We can do what we want. So you can't tell us how to choose our footballers. And if you don't have the genes, Mr. 6-year-old who doesn't have the genes, too bad, you know? Whereas some people would argue what you're saying, which is you cannot deny that potential. And Alfonso, I want to just make one more case to give you exactly, and where you're coming from, I believe, because I also think a lot like you, what you just said, is insurance companies. So in the future, insurance, when genetics really becomes to where it is, that we can know genetics very well, are insurance companies allowed to demand from individuals that they have to go through a genetic test to get a specific costing based on their genes? Now, what that will mean is that some people are going to pay crazy high premiums based on their genetics, and other people are not going to pay a lot at all. And some people who refuse to get genetic tests for whatever reason, which they're entitled to, just don't get medical aid. They won't be able to get any medical aid. So I said this to a lawyer recently, and the lawyer argued with me. He didn't argue with me, but he just told me his opinion. He said that everything in South Africa is contracts. So if a insurance company want to have a contract that says you have to take on a genetic test before you can get a price, they have the right to do that. And Rabbi Brody wasn't sure if that's true, because maybe one could argue that an insurance company is not a private company like all other companies. It's a company that's there to ensure that people get medicine when they need it, or medical attention when they need it. And if you are making it difficult for someone to get medical attention because you're enforcing a genetic test, and that's the wall to someone getting healed, maybe that's unethical for insurance companies to demand that, even though they are private companies or public companies that are allowed to do whichever contracts they want. That might be against the, what are insurance companies there in the first place? So that was another argument that he says. Are there any other ones? Okay, the last one I'll just tell you, and this is the last one I'll end off with, which is genetic testings for Judaism. So can you prove Judaism through a genetic test? So I recently went over this with a Dayan from the Beth Din in South Africa, and he told me that yes, there is a certain gene in the mitochondria of a woman that is only passed down from mother to daughter, from mother to child. Let me get this right. Yeah, from mother to child, but it only goes through the mother. And there's a gene that is like that. And they can do that test. So theoretically, if you don't know who your mother is, or let me say this again, you don't know if your mother is Jewish, but you can do the test that, how did he explain it? I'm getting confused here. Anyway, you can do a test that can tell you if you have that gene of a Jewish mother's gene, and that test exists out there. the Dayan told me that he would accept that in terms of proving your Jewishness. So unbelievable. You're doing genetic testing that can prove your Judaism, told to me from a Dayan in South Africa. Now, I don't know how expensive that gene test is. I don't know how it's collaborated, but apparently there is a case. There is such a thing as being tested for a Cohen. A Cohen can do a genetic test, and there is a Cohen gene that they can tell with like 99% accuracy or something, that if you have those genes, you are a Cohen. In general, that test works, but it doesn't work the other direction, meaning if you are a Cohen, if you've been told that you're a Cohen, or if you've been told that you're Jewish, and now all of a sudden they prove genetically that you're not a Cohen. The rabbis there said that you are what you were told, meaning if you were told that you're a Cohen, even though your genes are against that, you remain a Cohen. But in the other direction, which is if you didn't know if you're a Cohen, but you now are told that you have the Cohen gene, now you can take on that Cohen gene. So there is some talk over here in terms of how that works with religion and the Torah, but this is all very, very new. So just to conclude, we went through today some of the ethical dilemmas of how to treat genetic testing. In general, we said motivation can make a factor, like when you are getting a test to see who your child is, that can make a factor. Why are you doing the genetic testing? Also, we said that all the social inequalities and the lack of diversity and your intention of having children, even though they might not be the best, seemingly they're all okay when it comes to genes. And lastly, a genetically engineered human is human. It's only just a question of whose parents are. And lastly, we went through some like practical things. Are insurance companies allowed to force genetic testing? Are basketball teams allowed to force genetic testing for kids when they're 6 years old to see how tall they're going to be? All the stuff is going to have to be discussed by rabbis in the future. It's not clear how we deal with it at the moment, but it is clear to me, at least it's been told to me, that we are using genetic testing at the moment to see who's Jewish, as well as, the Cohen testing is the other one that I know about. The last one, and I'll leave this out there, is to get rid of Tay-Sachs. It's very easy. You can just test your genes and see if you're compatible with the person that you want to marry. And maybe we should be forcing all single Jewish people to take genetic tests before they date. I know in the United States, there is a massive database about this, and all the rabbis are promoting people to get that genetic testing before they date. But most people don't. Most people just date whoever they want to, and then after they fall in love, they do the genetic testing, and maybe it's too late. But that's another thing that countries should think about is, in order to make sure that people are healthy in the future, when, do they force genetic testings on people before they get married? That is a big question that is going to be coming up in the future. Thank you all for being here. Next week, we'll discuss a little about robotics. Stay healthy and well. Thank you for your comments.
Very nice.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Great.
Thank you.
Shalom.